Welcome to the Doctors Making a Difference podcast, where we help physicians to be empowered with the tools they need to be successful in medicine, in finance, and in life. Join us as we highlight doctors and other professionals around the world who are making a difference. Doctors change lives every day, but what happens when life changes yours? A single injury, a sudden illness, your career, your income, your future can shift in an instant. The best physicians don't just plan for success, they protect it. At Set for Life Insurance, they believe financial security isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. True own occupation disability insurance ensures that no matter what happens, your future stays in your hands. Because protecting your income means protecting everything you've built. Visit drpodcastnetwork.co/set for life today. Secure your future before life makes the choice for you. Today we have the privilege of having Dr. Brian Jepson. I'd like you to think a little bit about what we get to listen to. Brian is not only an experienced physician with years of experience, but he's also a financial expert and is going to teach us some of the tricks of the trade. This podcast highlights both doctors who are making a difference and gives us tools and resources so that we can be successful in finance, in medicine, and in life. And I would like to think that today you get a privilege of hearing both sides of that, both the physician who has ongoing ability to make a difference in the lives of those he's influencing, and talk a little bit about those financial tools and tricks that we need to all be able to implement so that we can make maximum use of our time and resources. And so with that, Dr. Brian Jepson, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience, Brian?
Yeah, Peter, thank you. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I'm a little long in the tooth. You know, I have been at it now for 30 years. I graduated medical school in 1995. So this is my 30-year anniversary, and it feels weird to be there already. But so, you know, my journey has been a little unique, to say the least. I think I've decided that I have just career ADD, because or maybe the 7-year itch is real, because it seems like about every 7 or 8 years, really since kindergarten, I feel like I need to do something different. And so that's kind of how my journey's been. And we can go over a little bit more of that as we talk along. But yeah, so that's who I am. I'm also a certified financial planner. I'm in process of full transition from medicine, but I still have my hand in it. Might keep it in for a while. I haven't decided yet where that's going to go, but still pull shifts in the ER but spend most of my time now doing financial planning.
Wow. Well, so Brian, I think everybody has their own interesting journey, and reading about yours and kind of reading through your book, I've really been interested to read that journey. And part of it is, the journey from a young man to becoming a physician, and then part of it is this financial stuff. But I want to hear a little bit more of the details in the middle. How was it that you decided to choose medicine? Obviously, you're bright, you're interested in a lot of things. How did you choose to pursue that in your life?
I've been thinking about that. And if I want to go back to the very beginning, it's because I was a good reader in kindergarten.
Go back, way back to the beginning. I like that.
Yeah. And the interesting part about that is, I don't know that I'm smarter than anybody else, but I did have a leg up in reading. And so when I went into kindergarten, I was ahead in reading than most of my classmates. And so my teacher immediately kind of set me apart at that point and said, okay, you're on an advanced level as a reader. And so we're going to have you start working on first grade or second grade material or whatever it was. And from that moment on, it kind of set me up as being successful in my head, but also in other teachers' heads, where I think that set a tone for me, where I felt like I could accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. And the reason why I go way back then is I think that's super important, right? That children develop confidence early on, where, if they're good at something, that they are championed in that, and that gives them confidence, and that their teachers encourage it. because from that moment on, almost all the teachers that I ever met or had said, "Oh, Brian, you should be a doctor."
Oh, really?
And
Even way
and
back then?
yeah, so in
Oh,
my
interesting.
head, that started early on. Is okay, I guess I'm smart. Smart enough that I could be a doctor, and because there are no doctors in my family before my elder brother, who kind of is on the same path and also became a physician. But we were the first doctors in the Jepson line, as far as I know. And and so part of that was just again encouragement from my parents, encouragement from teachers, feeling confident in myself academically, and then having that seed planted from a very early age that, wow, that's the doctor, being a doctor is kind of the pinnacle achievement. And so I started on that path pretty early and realized that I was interested in biology and science, and that then kind of seemed to fit my interest and my personality. And so I never really got off the path. I just stayed on it the whole time. Through college, I was a biology major, pre-med the whole way. Got right into medical school and just so it was fairly seamless. Now I do have an older brother who was 2 years ahead of me, and following a similar path, and that helped. I mean, at least I had him as a close mentor, at least an example about what it was all about. So I kind of knew what I was getting into, at least 2 years ahead. And so that's kind of how I ended up as a physician, I think.
Maybe take a little side journey here for a minute on your you referenced how important it is to have kind of that early childhood education and have people who are your cheerleaders, your people who are on your team. And I read a study once that said young people, especially teenagers, a bit down to elementary school, who have at least one or two adults that are kind of in their corner, like, oh yeah, that Brian Jepson, he's going to go get it, and right there with you, cheering you along and seeing past your weak moments, and like that kind of outcome is highly highly associated with success because as a young person, I've got someone who believes in me. And so all the elementary school teachers or those who aspire to do that, think about what a difference that makes. I think every one of us
Yeah.
can point to a teacher or multiple teachers along our path that really did inspire. And Brian, I think that's a great tribute to your kindergarten teacher to have
Yeah.
recognized that. And then, instead of just being like, there's another smart kid, like kind of promote you along the way and say, this is something you can do more with your life than you thought you could.
Yeah, and I think it works the other way too, and
Yeah.
I've seen that on, we'll get more into my special needs journey, but on the other side, when kids struggle with learning disabilities or, in school, they also get labeled,
Right.
as challenging kids or not smart kids or, which that may not be any more true than me being smarter than everybody else. Where it really is. I think it's super important to give everybody confidence and to really champion their strengths so that they can feel good about themselves and develop that. Because so many kids you hear um, were not given that, and they just never went on to lead a successful life. I mean, some of them overcame it, and we hear those stories too, which is awesome. But I think a lot of them just never developed the confidence to overcome some of that early, mindset. So
Yeah, when you think back to that time, like your world is pretty small. What your teachers think of you, what your peers think of you, what your parents think of you matters a lot. I mean, that's kind of your
yeah,
whole world, and it begins and ends with that kind of stuff. And so, excuse me. So if you come from a background where people are putting you down and saying you're labeled as something less than, it's easy to develop that mindset. But on the flip side, if you say, look, you're a person with aptitudes and abilities and gifts, and you have all these things, that you can really go far. So, yeah, let's come back to that on this autism journey that you went through with your family in just a minute here. But I want to hear the rest of your journey for a second. You chose medicine, and then eventually chose emergency medicine. And again, you probably could have chosen a variety of different specialties, but why did you choose emergency medicine and then stick with it for 30 years?
um, I've been asking myself that question for a long time.
It's a good introspective question for all of us.
Yeah. No, so the reason is that and I think this is why a lot of people go into emergency medicine. It's exciting, I mean, when you're in the ER, you're saving lives, right? So you get the sickest people. You're making decisions that if you make the correct decision, you save them. And also there's just a huge variety in anything. You have to be good at, you have to know something about everything pretty
Right.
much, so everything that comes in the door, you have to at least know how to identify it, know what to do about it, know how to stabilize them, and know where they need to go. So they either need to be admitted or, see a surgeon, or you can treat them, or, whatever. So there's just lots of instant decisions that you have to make. So to me, I thought, well, that sounds exciting. I'm gonna like that because I couldn't ever see myself doing the same thing day after day in terms of, like, for example, if you were, and I don't want to disparage any other medical specialties, but if you were like a super specialized um, surgical subspecialty or something like that, where you did the same surgery over and over and over again, to me that wasn't appealing because I just thought I would get bored with it. And that's so I think that's why I did it. And plus, emergency medicine has the advantage of shift work. I mean, there's an advantage and disadvantage of shift work, but the advantage is that when you're home, you're home. You're not on call. You're not expecting to answer phone calls or anything like that. When you're off, you're off. And so I thought that would be a good kind of balance with life. Now it turns out it's not as easy as it sounds.
No.
And when you're shifting between nights and days and weekends and holidays, and most of your time ends up being in the evening and away from family. And there's a lot of downside to that comes with it. But that's when, as I was approaching trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I think that was the main decisions for me. Is just I thought it sounded exciting. I liked the fact that I had to know a little bit about everything and could kind of deal with whatever came in the door.
Oh yeah. No, I can so relate, Brian. I'm a rural family physician. It's why I
Yeah.
chose that for the same reason. Like, oh, I get to do something different every day, and it's true. I mean, every day is different. I don't have the benefit of shift work. That's one of the
Yeah. Yeah.
downsides. Like I actually just came off an ER shift last night. Just
Wow.
coming in here to.
It looked good so far.
Yeah, thank you. Thankfully, sometimes it was kind of a winter storm, so not as many people came in, so that was a blessing.
Yeah.
But no, just the idea that you have this breadth and you have to be able to take care of a lot of things, and it's forever fascinating because you don't know what's coming in the door, and you might have to deal anybody with any condition in any age category, and you have to kind of be a little bit of a jack of all trades, but you have to know enough to actually. You can't just know about it. You have to know how to initiate the treatment process on just about everything, and that
Yeah.
is fascinating, and it makes for a lifetime of continual learning. So I for sure can relate to the appeal of that specialty.
Yeah. The downside of that is you have no control over your day.
That's true.
And and you have no control over your patients or the volume or what you see. And I honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why emergency medicine has a high burnout rate
Yeah.
is you just can't control your day.
Oh yeah.
It
Well,
just
you
what comes in. And if it's 30 people in the waiting room and you're the only doctor, you just have to wade through it.
just
So
have to muscle through it. Well, and and all of us have to kind of drive back and say, find the passion or the inspiration. Because if you're just checking the box, I'm just doing this to earn money so that I can, if it's just a job, it's such an all-encompassing, all-demanding job. People do get burned out if they say, I'm just here to check the box. Why is this so overwhelming? And so you do have to come back and say it's about the relationships or about the people or about the difference that I made in somebody's life.
yeah,
Some days are good, some days are bad. I think everybody has days where you're just kind of like,
right.
this was rotten, and other days where you're really pleased. Hey, I saved that person's life, and if I hadn't been there, they would have been a lot worse off than if they had. So I think it's an honorable career, and I'm glad you've been able to do it for so long.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about. I was reading more about your work with autism, and you shared on some of your social media stuff that you have some children of your own who have autism spectrum disorder, and then you've taken that work to write some books and start a couple of foundations, and I think that's really one of those things that can leave a true lasting impact for thousands of people if you set up an institution or something that helps. And do you mind telling us a little bit about that work and about your journey toward that?
Yeah, so it was shortly after I got out of residency, actually. So my first son was born when I was an intern. My second son was born in my third year, and so he was my second son. Aaron is his name. He was, oh, I don't know, 3 or 4 months old when we left residency and moved into my first job. And that we ended up leaving my first job after a couple of years and moving closer to home, like where I grew up, just to be around family. Lots of family in that area, and we had young kids, and we wanted them to be closer to grandparents.
Hmm.
So I moved shortly shortly before he was diagnosed. But he started showing some signs of it, probably right before maybe his second birthday, where he wasn't really developing normally with language. He had some words, but his interaction wasn't normal for sure. And this is back in 2000, and autism was becoming the awareness was becoming bigger then, but it's not like it is now,
Right.
where there's um, I mean, I saw the latest CDC report and something like 1 in 31 kids on the autism spectrum, which is crazy. But back then, there wasn't as much awareness. It, it, I, it, Autism never crossed my mind that that's what it was initially. But as things progressed, and we were talking to his pediatrician, who also didn't really suggest that's what it was either. But it became clear that there was something going on, and we ended up eventually getting a diagnosis. Not it didn't take that long, but around age 3, he was diagnosed with full autism. That changes your life when that happens in lots of different ways. Especially as a parent, but also, just in terms of how you view finances and your job and everything. And so we kind of unwittingly fell into that world of special needs and had to start navigating that. And as part of what I was curious about is, since I didn't know that much about autism, I wanted to know more about it and what is it exactly and what's causing it and what does it do to their body. And so I did a lot of just personal research in looking at the medical side of it, seeing what was out there in terms of, is it just a behavior disorder, or is there some sort of a physiological component to it, or what is known. And that, as I dove into that and kind of learned a lot more about the immunological issues and the gastrointestinal issues and how all that interacts with the brain, um, there were a variety of treatment options that people had been trying around. As we met other families that they had been trying, but there wasn't any physicians in the area that did it. A lot of these people were going to Louisiana, and I lived in Utah, so they were going to Louisiana to get treatment. And so I went to some conferences, read a lot more, and decided, well, I can at least use my MD degree and help facilitate some of this for people so that they don't have to travel. So I opened up a clinic in Utah that was I had a friend who helped me set it up as a nonprofit. And I was still working in the ER, and I kept working in the ER, and I was just doing this on the side pretty much voluntarily. And starting to treat families and kids, and is really kind of a functional medicine type of approach, lots of dietary stuff, lots of supplements, some medications, just trying to approach the physiology and see if we can make any adjustments there. One thing led to another. I ended up writing some things that got out there, and then was recruited to come and actually do autism treatment full time for a while. And so I went to a clinic in Texas that we helped to set that up, and it was a multidisciplinary clinic. So we had behavioral people there, and we had GI and me just kind of doing the we call it biomedical stuff. And so that's I did that for full time. I left emergency medicine because I thought that this was what I needed to do at the time, and to help other people, other families, with what I was, the journey that we were on at the same time, and see if we can make any kind of a difference. And so I ended up doing that for about 5 years full time, out of emergency medicine, and then jumped back in ER when when we were down there in Texas. We ended up adopting another son who had autism as well, and he was, they're both pretty impacted. Our third son, Austin, is severely impacted. He has no language and had lots of behavioral problems, and so it was a challenge, and we probably bit off more than we could chew at the time.
That's
It felt like.
a big commitment. Wow.
Yeah, and so I at that point it was like, okay, I have three kids, two of whom have pretty severe autism, who are very likely to be dependent on me forever. Um, I probably need to go make some money.
That's
So
true.
I went back into emergency medicine after, 5 or 6 years, so that I could shore up my own finances.
Yeah. Well, Brian, I want to step back on that for a minute. Like, I mean, it's awesome that you did that, because most people who have a child with autism, and now we call it autism spectrum disorder, especially at that time, most people would not have had a medical degree or a medical background. And I started medical school in 2004, and there just wasn't quite the developed these big multidisciplinary teams that we are used to having at our big pediatric institutions now. At that time, I think it was still kind of being discovered and understood, and I'm sure that we're still at the tip of the iceberg. In
Yeah,
100 years from now, I'm assuming we'll know a lot more about autism spectrum disorder than we do now.
I
But the
hope
fact
so.
that I hope so. The thing that I think is cool from your story is you saw a problem, and kind of irrespective of finances, you said, okay, I've researched this, and I'm kind of an expert at it now. Not that you're the world's expert, but you say I have more knowledge than most people have because of my situation working with my own child and working with others, such that you were able to go out and say, I'm going to start a clinic that could maybe help other people in our area. And then in Texas, it sounds like you were able to continue that same work, and I think that's pretty neat. When you think back to the kindergarten Brian Jepson, like, you're going to make a difference. How are we going to do this?
Yeah.
And you did. You think about that, and I hope that has left a lasting impact on those who you served, and and those the ongoing knowledge of those institutions that you worked with. You hope that that'll continue to serve and be a blessing for those who continue to benefit from that knowledge, because autism spectrum disorder is here to stay. It's been here all the while, but I think we just recognize it much more than ever in the past, for sure.
Yeah, it was definitely a labor of love. It was not leaving emergency medicine to go set up a nonprofit clinic for autism was not a financially sound decision.
No, you
But,
wouldn't have done. You wouldn't have
no,
advised somebody to do it just for the
no,
good of
but
finances. But
for me, it was definitely, I remember my wife and I having conversations at the time and just saying, well, I mean, life is more than money, and this is something that we can do to help others and hopefully help our own kids, and so we decided to do it, and just took a leap of faith, I guess.
yeah. Well, do you have any? You've kind of outlined the nuts and bolts of how that happened, but do you have any stories in that time frame of people that you impacted, or how your own children were impacted by having that center? Because it sounds like that has the potential to do tremendous good for those who needed that.
Yeah, it was interesting to see how it grew. I mean, at the time, again, there were a handful of doctors around the country that were kind of fully invested in trying to do this kind of work. I mean, there's plenty of others that were on the research side, but in terms of trying to figure out how to create some sort of clinical protocols to see if it would help. And I went into it with no agenda. So I didn't come from a functional medicine background at all. I'm an MD and emergency medicine, and autism treatment day to day is about as opposite from emergency medicine as you can think.
Right.
And but it, it was interesting to um, you know we had people come to our clinic from all over the country, and where they were desperate with the challenge of what they were facing. And I understood that because I was in the same shoes as them. And so with that, you have to also, so I saw a lot of my role as helping them through the emotional side of dealing with special needs in your family. And at the same time to see what we can do to help them get better. And lots of kids improved dramatically. Many of them actually eventually dropped their diagnosis, um, it, with the various things that we were doing. Now the problem is that when you're treating kids with autism, there's so many variables that are going into it. You're doing behavior, you're doing school stuff, you're doing what we were doing with diet changes and nutrients and various medications. Um, so it's hard to know what was helping, and because it wasn't consistent with every kid.
Right.
And so it was challenging as a trying to be somewhat evidence-based physician to help decide what was useful and what was not useful. But yeah, I saw lots of kids that if and I've had the opportunity to meet a couple of them again now 20 years later, and they are leading functional lives. And so that's really gratifying. There's plenty of kids that I'm also seeing again that still have significant challenges. And so, that's the difficult part about autism, is that, there it is a spectrum, and it's hard to know what the best approach is for everybody. And as I kind of have thought in retrospect more about it, I do think that um, it's individual still. You have to understand the family, and getting back to maybe my kindergarten discussion is you have to find their strengths and not just try and recover their weaknesses, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, it
You know,
does.
so
Like
so
I've
so my kids, for example, they're kids. I mean, they're adults now. Aaron's 27 and Austin's 24, and Ben is my oldest is 29. But they Aaron has some language, but he can't really communicate any deeper thoughts. I mean, he can tell what he wants and what he wants to do and things like that, but you can never sit down and have a conversation with him. But we've been able to teach him how to communicate with typing, on an iPad. It started out with a stencil board. And by doing so, we've tapped into his true self, because he can't ever say it, but he can type it.
hmm.
And he's been able to, so now he has his own blog. He's written two books.
Oh
One
my
is a
goodness. That's
one is an
awesome.
awesome novel that anybody who wants to just autism author or no, it's a really good book. It's called I Never Get Lost in the Woods by Aaron
Wow.
Jepson.
He can't
So
speak
it
it, but he can type it.
yeah, so for those on video, I mean it's a decent sized book. It's like 300-page novel, and that's a murder thriller with an autism antagonist who doesn't have much speech. And so, or not, a protagonist, excuse me,
Yeah.
who doesn't have much speech, but it's a really good story, and it also demonstrates how not to put people in a box, in terms of
Right.
what their capability is. And so not only the character in the story, but also my son in being able to write it. And so I think and my other son, who's completely nonverbal, has a book of poetry, and he has amazing poems. And so, I think just trying to find their strength and doing whatever you can to champion that is important.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know, all the while trying to help their bodies and everything else to get better. I don't want to discount that, you know, but it's um, ultimately you have to just give work with what you have and be sure that they have the best life that they can have.
yeah, take people to their maximum potential while you're learning. I wanted to reflect back on that comment you made about evidence-based medicine. That's wonderful. We all try to follow evidence-based medicine, but what if there is no evidence
Exactly.
on some of the
You're creating your own evidence a lot of the
And so you
times.
have to do I mean, all research starts with a good idea. And you
Yeah.
start, and then you can design a formal study around it, or partner with an institution that does more formal studies. And then the more information we gain, the more we learn what actually works. And yet everything is individual. I've found that on
Right.
so many
Absolutely.
areas, you know, not just autism, but I come across so many different things. And we'll usually go to the edge of what is known. And then they say, well,
Right. Then what?
I always say to my patients, nobody studied you. We don't
Yeah,
know.
that's the thing. I mean,
And
everybody's
so,
individual
right,
and how they react. You know, so even if you have a full study that shows a small significant improvement in a subset of the population, there's a large subset of the population that reacted different.
right.
You
And
know,
they just
so
weren't studied. And so we
yeah,
all, I think, I mean, you know how it is, the old adage, the more you know, the more questions you have. And I think that
right,
is true for autism spectrum and so many things. And you just have to adapt it. And I want to be careful on some of the functional medicine stuff. Sometimes people go against what I think is really evidence-based. And so I have patients who I
yeah,
have to kind of redirect and say, hey, be careful, because some of these things might actually be causing you tremendous harm.
right,
But often we use that stuff, and I say, well, we don't have classic, you know, double-blinded, randomized, multi-center trials because we might have that years down the road, but we just simply don't. So we have to
yeah,
base what we know and then take the next step with you so that you can become the best version of yourself. And I think that's the benefit of having a physician instead of like AI robot or somebody to help
right.
guide you through what the evidence is. You're trying to help a person based on all the information that we have to try to get the next best outcome. And anyway, Brian, I love that you have done that and are still doing that with your sons, and that you've helped a lot of people across the nation as you started those businesses. And that's, you know, that's a real tribute to you and to your brave wife. Like you
Yeah.
say,
Oh, no,
you
you
know,
know,
you have to do it
my
together.
wife's the champion, really. You know,
Yeah,
because she's the one that um, dealing with it every day at home, and you know, I get to go to work
yeah,
sometimes. But you know, I mean, it was interesting because it was stressful on our family to be 24/7 autism, both of us, you know,
oh yeah,
where it was like I went to work every day and heard the same stories over and over and over again and came home and dealt with the same thing at home
yeah.
24/7. So
Well,
so
caregiver
it was
fatigue.
actually when I decided to go back into emergency medicine, that was to relieve some stress.
That's true.
So
Well, caregiver fatigue is real, you know,
it is.
and it's kind of, I feel like, still under recognized. And I mean, I try to talk to my patients about it who are in that mode, like, hey, you've got to make sure you don't put guilt in the middle of this. You have to
Yeah.
take care of yourself, and part of that is time, exercise, sleep, you know, personal interests. If you don't do it, you can't be a good caregiver, and it often takes a village. It can't just be you by yourself. You got to recruit other people, whether it be family or medical services or other caring individuals in the community that you can hire, whatever it may be. So man,
Definitely true. Yeah.
it's pretty cool, Brian. Well,
Thank you.
transition with me for a minute to this financial journey, the 7 year itch. I thought that was a good way to say it. But as you go through it now, 30 years into a career, tremendous background of knowledge of medical information, and you specifically, you know, you kind of took a little bit of a side journey there for a few years, trying to get these autism centers set up, but then realized, like you said, hey, I'm going to have financial responsibility for at least two of my three children, probably for most of my life. And I
And
need to
their
make
life.
sure, and their lives, yeah, I need to make
Yeah.
sure that my financial house is in order so that I can help those who depend on me, and you know,
Yeah.
for your own self. And so you discovered early on the time value of money, the importance of early investing, and some of those financial tools that I don't think were ever formally taught as physicians. And So I want to highlight your book here. If those on the video can see, it's called The Physician's Path to True Wealth by Brian Jepson, MD. And I read this book. I've really actually enjoyed reading it, I
Thank
want to
you.
have you kind of introduce what your book is about and highlight some of the things that you are trying to teach your fellow physicians as by becoming an author of a financial book and receiving your training as a CFP.
Yeah, so I mean, my journey into the financial industry, just well, I was always interested in personal finance, once I got out of residency. And again, that was a long time ago. That was before blogs and podcasts and all that kind of stuff
Right.
that talked about finance, so the early days of the internet, there were a few sites that I was reading, but mostly it was just out of books, where I would just find books that I was interested in because I really wanted to be a good steward of my money. And so early on, I was interested in learning how to invest, trying different things, learning about the value of real estate, as an option. Um, and was kind of on a good path, but then autism hit, and that took me to a different side journey for a while. But I tried to keep um, using the principles that I had learned, and just kind of kept doing the best that I could with a lot less income than I had when I was in emergency medicine, but just kept investing and doing what I could to follow those principles. Um, and it still worked out. It's certainly the power of compounding interest is incredible, and it creates exponential growth. But that allowed me, when a few years ago, when I was getting burned out of emergency medicine and even wondering if I wanted to stay in medicine at all. That was kind of after the COVID, well, after the height of the COVID pandemic, and in the ER, that was challenging. It was challenging for everybody. But, found myself frequently asking, like maybe almost every shift asking, how much longer can I do this?
Oh,
And it was, at that point I was like, okay, well, I have some options. I don't have to work just to put food on the table, at least not at the level I don't have to be full time. And so my options are, okay, well, go part time and just have the rest of the time be downtime, or maybe do something non-clinical. Or what would it be like to do something totally different?
hmm.
And as I thought about that, I thought that sounds refreshing. So if I wasn't going to be a doctor, what would I have done? And, that's a hard question for a lot of doctors because a lot of doctors can't think of anything that they would have otherwise done.
Well, it's so all consuming.
Yeah. And so, but I thought about it and I said, well, I really enjoy finance. And what gets me out of bed in the morning is looking at investment stuff and learning more stuff about it. And so, I want to explore that a little bit. So without any real intention of knowing where I was going with it, I started, I enrolled to get a master's degree. So I went and got a master's degree in finance, or enrolled in that. And then as I started learning, because I really wanted to just dive in and really understand it, and I said, worst case scenario, I'm just going to learn a lot and it's going to help me. Best case scenario, maybe I'll find a career within that I would enjoy doing. Is I call it my encore career. And so as I started in that master's program, and started understanding the entire field of finance, which is huge, it's broad. You can do lots of different things within it. Um, I was pulled towards becoming a financial planner because it felt familiar. So as a physician, we spend all of our careers, gathering data and talking to people and trying to figure out what their pain points are, and helping them create a plan and helping them implement that with their health. Financial planning is the same thing. It's just with their finances. And so for me, I felt like I was already good at it. So I decided to become a certified financial planner, which I think is, I mean, that's to me that's the board certification of financial planning, really.
Hmm.
So I got a CFP and started working in the field, and have really enjoyed it. It's been a good journey for me. It's something that I it gives me a lot of energy. I enjoy talking with, my niche is probably not surprisingly, but it's physicians and special needs folks.
Right. Well,
You know,
those are your
because
two backgrounds. Like
yeah,
you
because
understand that world very well.
those are the people that I understand the best and can empathize with and kind of communicate the best with. And so that's how I got started in the financial industry. And then, but part of it is, yeah, I enjoy working individually with clients and helping them creating a financial plan and helping them solve their issues and just getting them on the right path. That's a lot of fun. And I enjoy that part of it. But, it's a small, I mean, I can only see so many people. And so I'm also passionate about just trying to broaden out education generally so that so the impact is bigger, in terms of helping physicians make better choices with their money. And so that led to this book, and it's called The Physician's Path to True Wealth. And the important thing for me, it's 12 steps to gaining control over your money and your time. So I guess it's a 12-step
Yeah,
a
no doubt.
12-step program. But these are foundational steps. These are, I don't get deep into the weeds, and there's lots of weeds in finance, but you don't have to dive into that to be successful. So I wanted to be sure that everybody understood the foundational steps towards financial independence. But more than that, I wanted to help create a mindset about, okay, what does it mean to be wealthy and why do I want that? Or what is financial independence and why is that valuable and how do I get there? And so that's why I added the true wealth in the title. What is true wealth? And to me, it's not about how much money you make. It's not about what kind of car you drive, what kind of house you live in, what kind of vacations you spend or that you go on. It's about creating control over your time. And the way to create control over your time is by creating assets. And, because you can make all the money that you want to make, but if you spend it on fancy stuff, you're living a rich lifestyle, but you're not wealthy. And so if you'll indulge me for just a second, I can kind of give some bullet points about how I define true wealth.
Well, I'd like you to, because when you think about life, you only get a few decades of life. Really, it's a pretty short experience, and what matters more than your autonomy and your wealth. And so, yeah, please do go through what that means.
Yeah. So to me, there's a few things that it encompasses, and one is primarily it's that you get to enjoy what you do, and the reason you get to enjoy what you do is because you get to choose what you do, right? So if you have the choice where money is no longer an issue, where you have to go to work to pay the bills or to maintain your lifestyle, then you have choices and you get to choose. Okay, I I want to work less. I still enjoy work, but I don't want to work full time. And or if you decide that you want to do something different, like me, you can choose a different career, or it just gives you options, and then you don't. Work is not a drudgery because you enjoy what you're doing. That leads to the second point, which says you work because you want to, not because you have to. And I don't think the point of financial independence is to stop working. I don't think the point of retirement is to stop working. I think we all work until the days we die. It's just whether we get paid for it or not. You know,
That's true.
work is, unless you're just sitting around and doing nothing, you're working, doing something. And so I like thinking about work is because you're working because you want to and not because you have to. The other one is that your assets work for you and not you for them. Because eventually, if you get enough assets, they're providing your income, and you're not reliant on your job as a salary per se.
Yeah, if you can
Um,
change it so that you're not just having to trade time for money, but rather you have assets that are building so that you have that financial freedom slash independence. Yeah, that's really important. I love all those points. Did you say there was another one?
there's a couple more. One is you have time. I'll just go through them fast.
No, go
You have
ahead.
time. Yeah, you have time and resources to explore hobbies and broaden your interests, which makes life, I don't want to say richer because I already disparaged the term rich, but it makes your life wealthier. Let's put it
Hmm.
that way. You have time for your family and friends, not just quality time, but quantity time.
Hmm.
As doctors, sometimes we have to say, okay, well, I don't have a lot of quantity time, but I'm going to make the time I have really quality. But if you're financially independent, you can do both things. They can be quality and quantity. You can retire on your own terms. And then the last point I think is important is that you have the capacity and the willingness to give back to others. And I really think that if you're wealthy, I mean, I think that that really defines if you're wealthy, right? If you have enough that you can give to others, then you have more than enough. And that process of giving back to others always bounces back to you in one way or the other.
Yeah. No, I love it. Those are time-honored principles, and I, I've been blessed to have some financial good examples in my own life and learn. But I wish that I had had your book years ago, because think about how specifically, how clearly those principles are taught. And if you can understand when you're in your 20s and 30s what wealth actually is, it's not about a bank account figure. I mean, it has to have some math behind it so that it works. It's about the ability to control your time, and I love the idea that not only are you able to spend time, but plenty of time with the people you love, and then give back generously, give to others, give to people who are less fortunate or somebody else who's on the way. And that's a true measure of wealth. And I suppose we can all have some measure of that. You don't have to wait till you've hit some specific number before you become
Right.
generous and kind with your time. You have to do it along the way. But there's this mindset that you refer to say, look, I'm doing this so that I can live this full, wonderful life, not so that I can achieve some number and then just go hide. It's so that I can
Yeah.
adapt my work to be what I want my life to look like. Because
Yeah.
that's a tool, and if you don't play it right, it leaves you kind of crippled. And what a wonderful gift.
Yeah, and for sure, and I like how you said it's not about a number. I mean, lots of times when you're in the financial independence community, you say, okay, well, what's your number? What's your retirement number? How much do you need? And whether that's however you come up with that, whether that's the 4% rule or you use a financial planner to help you, um, there's no, I, at least in my experience, there's not, okay, today I've achieved it. I hit my number. Now I'm truly wealthy. It, it's, and if you look at that definition, you can become truly wealthy well before you hit your financial independence. You can have it, you can start giving back to others. You can start creating habits or, developing hobbies. You can start making choices about what you want to do, and even after you hit that number, doesn't mean that you can't become more wealthy. You can always give back to more to others. You can always do more things, so I try and get away from it being, okay, well, here's my financial independence number, and then I'm done.
Right. I really like the concept that I've read about is called, some people call it coast fi, but the idea is that you're on a you've played things well enough that you're on a journey that if you continue on that, you've got enough money set aside that if you don't touch it, it will continue to grow. As money does. Even if you've left it invested in an average S&P 500 index fund, it
Yeah.
would double about every 7 or 8 years, and that you're
Right.
on that journey so that the resources are there and they'll come into fruition with time. But then and then along the way, that gives you a lot of latitude to say, I'll
Right.
live and give and behave in a way such that the finances, like this big number that I have to hit when I'm 65, is no longer the thing that I obsess about. I worry more about how am I spending my time, and am I being a good steward of the resources that are at my disposal, and how am I doing spending time with the people I actually love and care about. And so what a cool thing.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you think about true wealth because when you're wealthy and when you have all of those things kind of checked off, or that you're on the way to that, um, money becomes like it's not an issue anymore,
You
right?
don't
So
think
so
about it
you
as
don't you
much.
don't obsess about money anymore. So having true wealth means you take money out of the picture. So it's no longer obsessing about money, and so I just think it's interesting how it's not the money.
Yeah.
Money's a tool to get there, but it's not the money that makes you wealthy. It's all these other things about how you can control your time and so yeah.
Yeah, no, I just resonate so much with what you're saying, Brian, and I would want to scream it from the rooftops to every doctor out there. I mean, to
Yeah,
everybody, but specifically to physicians, because you don't really have any money till you're in your 30s sometime,
right.
and then you've delayed that time value of money by at least a decade,
Yeah,
maybe 15 years from your peers, and so you have to be conservative with your spending early on,
right,
so that when
right.
you are in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you have the latitude to do all the stuff that you just talked about, Brian, to say, I'm going to change to whatever I want to do, or I'm going to spend more time doing this thing that I'm passionate about, or I need to slow down because I don't want to burn out, or my health has taken a turn, but my family's not destitute
Yeah.
because I can't go to work for 80 hours a week. And the importance of that is not just a financial tool, but as a life tool, just can't be overstressed.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. Well, Brian, this is so important. So I do recommend everybody to read this book, The Physician's
Thank you.
Path to True Wealth. I read it, and like I said, I think that's a wonderful thing. Brian asked me to give an endorsement. I wrote my little blurb on the back of the book, but I believe it. I think these principles are
Yeah.
time honored, and if we do it, it will be a tremendous gift to all of us.
I appreciate the endorsement, Elsie.
Yeah. Well, so Brian, you've shared with us this wonderful journey, like I say, of your life and how you've kind of thought about it. What would you tell to someone that's early stage physician or a resident who's considering, how to prioritize time and money? Like, what are some tips or advice you would give somebody early on?
Well, there's several that I think are important. The first one is to take ownership of your own financial education, right? So I mean, you and I met first at the White Coat Investor Conference,
Right.
and that's a big community of physicians who are interested in finance. But I don't think that's the biggest community. I think those that are involved in that assume that all physicians are interested in finance because you're around people that like it. But in my experience, that's a small portion of the medical community, and most physicians don't. They're just kind of winging it. They're right. They just assume that their high income is going to make everything work out. But I would caution against that thinking because if you don't really plan ahead and make good choices early on, you're behind the game. If you're, in your mid 50s and wanting to retire and you realize that you haven't, done the kind of work that you needed to create those assets that you need. So when I say take ownership, I don't mean that you have to do it all on your own. I mean, there are plenty of resources out there. I'm happy to help as a financial advisor. There are many good financial advisors out there that can help steer you in the right direction and help you make those choices. But do something. Don't just assume that it's all going to work out because it may or may not. And you can make some pretty big mistakes that can have huge impacts down the road. So for young physicians, all physicians actually, I think that's important. And then the other thing, especially with young physicians, is avoid lifestyle creep, right? I mean, we have put off our spending for much longer than most people that you go to high school with. And so it's easy to, in your mid 30s and you're still $300,000 in debt because of school and you just barely finished your training or whatever to say, okay, whew, now I see my big paycheck. I'm getting everything that I wanted all along. And so you start spending, living a rich lifestyle, but not creating wealth by saving and investing. So it's super important that you avoid that. It doesn't mean that you have to live like a resident forever. I mean, I think it's okay to improve your lifestyle a little bit, but not at the expense of saving and investing, because compounding interest makes a huge difference. It's an exponential curve, and if you can save and invest early on, even a relatively small amount, down the road, that's going to pay huge dividends. And so, I think physicians, especially with the late start, they really need to be saving about 20% of their income,
Hmm.
saving and investing. 20% of their income. And if they do that, they're in good shape. And if you want to retire earlier, save more and invest
Right.
more, and you'll probably have more chance. But if you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to keep pushing back my savings for another 5 or 10 years, even while you're paying off loans, I mean, I think it's important that you get invested as early as you can to let that compounding interest do its thing. So those are the main things. I think that other things that are helpful, I think, is to, there was a study that recently came out that showed, I think, like 49% of physicians are burned out, right now. And that was a Medscape study. Some specialties like emergency medicine was in the 60%, which is incredible. And, so start planning ahead. Assume that at some point you're probably going to feel burned out. So what can you do now to help prevent that? And I think number one, securing your financial future will help. Number two, I think, creating multiple streams of income or multiple areas of interest that will allow you, to just kind of broaden out your life a little bit so that you don't feel stuck in a certain setting, So I think that's stuff that you can plan ahead for and hopefully even prevent the burnout process.
Right. Well, think about if you had the latitude early on when you start to feel, okay, this isn't as much fun, it's burnout. Instead of leaving medicine, you could say, hey, I'm cutting back my hours to part-time for a year or two. Let's see how it goes. Yeah. Or I'm going to try some side hustle while I'm still working shifts in the ER, whatever. If you had that latitude to make those changes, that's like a burnout preventative maintenance plan right there. So
yeah, exactly.
Man, Brian, this has been so instructive, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. I have learned a lot, and I just think this is such an important message to get to our listeners. And I'd hope that any physician who's listening to this would say, okay, there's concrete steps that I can take. I can look up information. I can read a book. I can find specific things that I can do to set my house in order, and that will set you up for a career satisfaction. But I would say even more important than that, just true life satisfaction. You can do with those few decades of life that you get, you can do with that what you want, and you'll end up a lot more satisfied than if you feel like you're working and you're letting the tail wag the dog, so to speak, financially.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
Brian, thank you for taking the time. I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. For anybody who has interested in reaching out to me, probably the easiest way to do that is on my website. It's kind of has all the things. So it's brianjepson.com. And if you have interest in financial advising, you can link to me through there.
Great. I'll put that in the show notes, Brian. Thank you so much, and we'll keep in touch.
Okay, I appreciate it, Peter. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for tuning into the Doctors Making a Difference podcast. And thank you for what you do to help your patients and your community. Your work truly helps so many people. We produce this content to help you have the tools you need to stay in medicine and to highlight the amazing work being done by physicians around the world. Please note that while I am a physician, and many of the guests on this program are also physicians or other professionals, the discussions on this podcast do not represent my employer or any professional organizations to which I belong. This podcast is for your information and entertainment only, and should not be taken as professional advice. You should seek appropriate professional advice pertaining to your own situation. Please check out more of our content on our website, doctorsmakingadifference.com. Also, please follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast player or YouTube channel, and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps to spread the message. Finally, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, or if you'd like to nominate someone else to be a guest, please visit the website or email admin@doctorsmakingadifference.com. See you next time.